You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we preview the Test series between Sri Lanka and Australia. It's the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the fixture for this Test series between Sri Lanka and Australia. 2 Test matches in this Test series between Sri Lanka and Australia. The first Test will be at the Galle International Stadium. They'll be on the 29th of June. And the second Test match will be back at the Galle International Stadium, and that will be on the 8th of July. Let's have a look at the Test stats between Sri Lanka and Australia. Head-to-head in Test matches overall, Sri Lanka have won 4 to Australia's 19. Both teams' records in Sri Lanka in Test matches. Sri Lanka have won 4, Australia have won 6. Leading run scorer, Michael Hussey with 994 runs. Leading wicket taker, Rangita Herath with 66. Most dismissals, Adam Gilchrist with 37. Most catches, Mahela J. Warner with 20. Most matches, Mahela J. Warner with 16. And the first Test match that Sri Lanka and Australia played was back in 1983. Let's have a look at both Sri Lanka's and Australia's Test squads. Let's have a look at Sri Lanka's Test squad and talk about some of the challenges facing Sri Lanka in this Test series. Their squad for this Test series against Australia: Dimuth Kuraratne, Chandamal De Silva, Dick Willer, Mbuldinia, Vishwa Fernando, J.L. Wickaramra, Chamika Kuraratne, Dilshan Matthews, Kusil Mendes, Ramesh Mendes, Nasanka, Rajita, and Vandasay. That's Sri Lanka's Test squad for this series against Australia. Let's talk about some of the challenges with both bat and ball that will face Sri Lanka in this Test series against Australia. Let's talk about the batting first of all. The biggest challenge facing Sri Lanka is how will the Sri Lankan batsmen go about scoring runs against this quality bowling attack from Australia. Not going to be easy. Australia do have a quality bowling attack, the likes of Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood and Lyon. And also Cameron Green as well. It's not going to be easy for the Sri Lankan batsmen. Especially Nathan Lyon's going to be the main threat for Sri Lanka in terms of the spin side of things on these surfaces in Galle for these 2 Test matches. So he's definitely going to be the biggest threat for the Sri Lankan batsmen. And it'll be interesting to see how they play him. And also Pat Cummins, Hazelwood and Mitchell Stark are going to be challenges as well for the Sri Lankan batsmen. So how do they go about scoring runs against them? Well, they need to make sure that their senior batsmen stand up and take responsibility. I'm talking about Dimuth Kuraratne. He's been a very good opener for Sri Lanka for a very long time, and he's been scoring runs over the last few years at a good rate. He's one batsman that Sri Lanka will need to rely on in terms of scoring runs. He is the captain, and he is one of the best openers that they've had in Sri Lanka for some time. Also, Angelo Matthews is the other player as well, a senior player. Recently, in the Test series against Bangladesh, he got 199, Angelo Matthews. A lot of people were saying, is his time up? Should he be out of the side? Should he retire? But he came and scored that 199 against Bangladesh to show that he's still a vital player in this Sri Lankan team. So I picked out those 2 batsmen, Kuraratne and Matthews, 2 senior players. It's very important for them to stand up, take responsibility with a very young, inexperienced batting lineup from Sri Lanka. And they are going to be tested up against the Australian bowlers. So it's important for Sri Lanka, and it's important for Kuraratne and Matthews, 2 senior players, to stand up and really take leadership of this batting lineup for Sri Lanka, because for Sri Lanka to be competitive and to really put Australia under pressure, they got to score runs. If they bat first, win the toss, bat first, they got to score runs. If they put big runs on the board and, bat really well, then their bowlers will feel like, okay, we've got some runs to play with, we can put Australia under pressure. And that'll be very important for Sri Lanka in this series, is that they've got to score big runs in the first innings. If they do that, they put Australia under pressure, and they know that in these conditions, with our spinners and our bowlers, in these turning conditions in Sri Lanka, we can definitely cause some problems and definitely cause some headaches for Australia. So it's vitally important for Sri Lanka to put up first innings runs. It's going to be very vital. It's going to be key in order for them to compete in this test series, but also to win a test match or the series. So very important for Sri Lanka to put big runs up in the first innings. Also do the basics with the bat well, Sri Lanka. I think it's very important for them to do the basics well. Build partnerships, rotate the strike, make sure that you're applying pressure back onto the Australian bowlers by playing positive cricket, having that positive intent and being aggressive, putting them under pressure. I think that will be the biggest thing for Sri Lanka, is they've got to put the Australian bowlers under pressure. They can't afford the Australian bowlers to let them dictate terms to the Sri Lankan batsmen. They've got to put them under pressure. If they do that, then they've already won half the battle. And that's going to be key. They've got to put them under pressure, because they've got to play positively. They've got to put them under pressure. They've got to back themselves, essentially. The Sri Lankan batsmen have got to back themselves and their ability and say, right, you know what? We can score runs off these bowlers. We just got to, put our head down and really grind it out and find a way. And that's what they've got to do against the Australian bowlers. They've got to find a way. They've got to put them under pressure. If they can do that, they've won half the battle. And the other half is trying to take 20 wickets. We'll talk about that with the bowling in just a moment. But they've got to do that, Sri Lanka. They really got to put them under pressure. They've got to put Nathan Lyon under pressure, and they've got to put Cummins, Stark, and Hazelwood under pressure as well. And even Cameron Green when he comes on to bowl. And even if the part-timers, or if Australia go with a second spinner, they've got to put them under pressure as well. So it's very important. That word pressure is very important. You've got to put the Australian bowlers under pressure. And that's going to be the key for Sri Lanka. If they are going to post big totals in this series and be competitive, they've got to do that. And it's important for everyone in the batting lineup to really know what their role is and play to their role. And play their roles accordingly. So as I said, do the basics with the bat in this series. And that's very important for Sri Lanka. Do the basics, as I mentioned before. Build partnerships, rotate the strike, and convert starts into big scores. So once you get in, get set, go on with it and make it a big score. And score a big century. And it's going to be very important that one of their top order score a big century to put themselves in a good position in this series. Because, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be first innings runs, and putting the Australian bowlers under pressure will be the key for Sri Lanka in this series. Because if they allow Australia to bowl to them, allow Australia to bowl what they want to bowl, they're probably not going to do well and probably get out and probably struggle. So it's very important for Sri Lanka to have that aggressive approach and positive intent and put pressure back on the Australian bowlers and make Pat Cummins change his tactics and make him be under pressure as well. So it's very important for Sri Lanka with the bat to score first innings runs and to put the Australian bowlers under pressure. Very important. So if they can do that, then Sri Lanka are a good chance of winning a test match or being competitive. So I think it's very important for their senior batsmen, as I mentioned earlier, to stand up. And it's very important for them to do the basics and to put the Australian Australian bowlers and Pat Cummins as captain under pressure in this test series. If they are going to post big totals or chase down targets and put themselves in good positions to win the test match or win the series. So those are some of the challenges that will face Sri Lanka with the bat in this series. Let's talk about the bowling. The biggest challenge for Sri Lanka with the bowling side of things is how will they go about taking 20 wickets. Now, Sri Lanka in this test series will rely heavily on their spinners, as we all know. It's pretty obvious that they'll rely on their spinners to get the job done on these turning tracks in Sri Lanka. But in 2016, in the test series that these two countries last played in, and where Sri Lanka won 3-0, Ranganatharith and Dilwan Pereira, who did most of the damage and caused Australia some problems in that 2016 series, are not playing in this series in 2022. Obviously, both of them are not in the side. Ranganatharith's retired, and Dilwan Pereira, I'm pretty sure he's retired as well. And obviously in that series, Ranganatharith took 28 wickets, Dilwan Pereira 15. So Sri Lanka's spin attack and bowling attack this time around in 2022 is quite inexperienced. It's quite young. It's quite new to Test cricket. And the Sri Lankan bowlers will have to be on their game up against the Australian batsmen, because Australia do have some quality batsmen. You've got Khawaja, you've got Warner, you've got Labuschagne, you've got Smith. Those batsmen will be very important for Australia in terms of helping Australia try and post big scores in this series. So for these Sri Lankan bowlers and for their spinners, if they do have some runs to play with, as we mentioned with the batting, if their batsmen can post big scores and put the Australian bowlers under pressure and be able to put big scores up in the first innings, then the inexperienced bowling attack can definitely cause some problems for Australia because they've got some runs to play with. If you've got big runs to play with in the first innings, you can be attacking, you can be aggressive, you can have attacking fields, and you can have men around the bat, which you usually do in the subcontinent, especially when the ball's turning. Then Sri Lanka are well and truly in the game and can cause some problems to Australia. So it's very important for the bowling unit from Sri Lanka to do the basics well with the ball. Bowl consistent line of length, execute your plans with the ball, bowl to your field, bowl dot balls and maidens to build pressure on the Australian batsmen, and take your chances. Very important to make sure we don't drop any catches. We've got to take all our chances, create the half run-out opportunities, take every chance that comes your way, because if Sri Lanka do that, then they're well and truly on their way to win a test match or win the series. But it's very important for their bowlers, if they've got runs to play with, they can definitely cause Australia a few headaches and definitely put them under pressure, especially on these turning tracks in Sri Lanka. But it's quite an inexperienced attack. They will be tested up against some quality batting from Australia, but it'll be interesting to see how they go. But if they got runs to play with, they can definitely attack, definitely look to take wickets, and they'll be a bit more positive, play with that positive intent, be aggressive with the ball. They can definitely cause Australia a few headaches in this series. So those are some of the challenges that will face Sri Lanka with the ball in this test series against Australia. And those are some of the challenges that they will face with the bat and ball in this test series against Australia. Obviously for Sri Lanka, it's an important series in terms of WTC, World Test Championship points, but also it's important as well. After the great series victory in the ODI series, it's important for Sri Lanka to carry on the winning momentum from the ODI team heading into the Test series, and also put some smiles back on people's faces in Sri Lanka and make them proud of the national team as well. So Sri Lanka, they've got a lot of challenges with the bat and the ball in this series. They're definitely up against it, but if they can execute with the bat and with the ball, they're a good chance to being competitive and also maybe winning a test match as well and probably winning the series. So it'll be interesting to see how Sri Lanka go in this series. And I think everyone will want them to do well and hopefully put in a good performance and make everyone proud in Sri Lanka. And that's the main thing. Make them proud of the national team and hopefully do your best and do well. Let's have a look at Australia's Test squad and talk about some of the challenges facing Australia in this Test series. So let's have a look at Australia's Test squad. Pat Cummins, Ashton Agar, Scott Boland, Alex Carey, Cameron Green, Josh Hazlewood, Travis Head, Josh Inglis, Usman Khawaja, Marnus Labuschagne, Nathan Lyon, Mitchell Marsh, Glenn Maxwell, Steve Smith, Mitchell Starc, Mitchell Swepson, and David Warner. That's Australia's Test squad for this Test series against Sri Lanka. Now, let's talk about the batting and bowling challenges for Australia in this Test series, but we'll start with the batting first, and the biggest challenge facing Australia's batsmen is playing against the spin bowlers, and it will be a difficult challenge for them in this series in Sri Lanka. How to score runs and how to work out a plan and a method to deal with the spinning conditions in Sri Lanka. That's the biggest challenge for Australia. And in 2016, that was sort of Australia's undoing. They did struggle against the Sri Lankan spinners back in 2016 in that Test series, which they lost 3-0. And obviously this time around, Australia don't have to face Rangana Herif or Dilron Pereira, who caused most of the damage and problems for Australia back in that 2016 series. Now, for Australia, the challenge that they'll be facing in this Test series is that the spinning conditions in Sri Lanka are very different to those that they played in Pakistan. Now, as we know, in Pakistan, the ball doesn't turn as much, whereas here in Sri Lanka, the ball does turn a lot. So that will be the biggest difference and the biggest challenge, and something that Australia has to adapt in this series is the amount of turn that the pitches here in Sri Lanka do create compared to Pakistan, where the ball didn't turn as much, and the Pakistan spinners did get the odd ball to turn, but weren't really threatening, whereas the Sri Lankan spinners, that could be a different story here in Sri Lanka. So that's the one area that Australia will have to look out for, is that they've got to be able to adapt and able to find a way in these difficult spinning conditions. Now, obviously, in the last two ODIs of the ODI series, Sri Lanka bowled a lot of spin. For the most of the 50 overs that Sri Lanka bowled, most of the overs were bowled by spinners in the fourth and in the fifth ODIs of that ODI series. So that's perfect preparation for Australia. Obviously, Australia didn't have a great time against the Sri Lankan spinners in the ODI series, but facing those amounts of overs of spin will put them in good stead for the Test series, and will really make them get used to the spinning conditions and to different types of spinners, like they did in those last two ODIs against Sri Lanka. So the likes of Warner, Labuschagne, Green, Carey, who played in the last two ODIs, that will serve them well in terms of that preparation heading into the Test series, because all of those players who I mentioned who played in the last two ODIs will have a big role to play for Australia in this Test series with the bat. And facing those amounts of overs of spin will put them in good stead. Obviously, Australia did struggle, but obviously they'll face a different spin attack to what they faced in the ODI series heading into the Test series. It'll be a different spin attack, but that preparation and that time in the middle facing the spinners will serve them well, as I mentioned before, heading into the Test series against Sri Lanka. Obviously, Australia in the Pakistan series had a plan to the spinners and how they were going to play to the spinners. I think they'll adopt the same plan and same game plan as they had in Pakistan to Sri Lanka. Now, Australia played the spinners okay in Pakistan. As we know, in Pakistan, the ball doesn't turn as much as it does in Sri Lanka, so that will be a tough challenge for Australia. But as we saw in Pakistan, the Australian batsmen did have a plan against the spinners. They were being aggressive, using their feet to get to the pitch of the ball, playing the sweep, reverse sweep, paddle, and lap shots. And Australia will have the same plans here in Sri Lanka. So it's very important for Australia not to deviate off those plans that they had in Pakistan, be able to have the confidence and self-belief that we can play in these conditions and we can score runs, will be the biggest factor for Australia in this Test series. They've got to believe that we can score runs. It's not like it's going to be difficult. It is going to be difficult, but we can definitely score runs on these surfaces, and we've got to have a game plan to match that and back that up. So that's what they did in Pakistan, and it turns out they played the spinners pretty okay over in Pakistan. But as I mentioned before, the pitches don't turn as much as they do in Pakistan compared to Sri Lanka. So the big difference is the amount of turn from the surface here in Sri Lanka. It will turn a lot more than it did in Pakistan. So that will be the challenge for the Australian batsmen, to adjust to that amount of turn and spin in Sri Lanka. So if Australia can stick to their plans that they had to the Pakistan bowlers in Pakistan and apply those plans to the Sri Lankan spinners here in Sri Lanka, then I think Australia will be okay in terms of posting scores in this series with the bat on an individual basis, but also on a team basis as well, to make sure that they're in a good position to win the Test matches and the series. Now, the one thing that Australia didn't do in Pakistan, which they have to do in Sri Lanka, is convert starts into big scores. Now, in the test series against Pakistan, on those flat surfaces in Pakistan, Usman Khawaja was the only one to score 2 centuries. And everyone else struggled. Everyone else got a start and then got out and didn't really make the most of those conditions. So it's vitally important for Australia in this test series against Sri Lanka that all the batsmen, once they get in, get set, get a start, they've got to convert that into a big start, into a big score, I should say, rather than just getting a start and then getting out. That's what happened in Pakistan. They can't afford to do that in Sri Lanka because you cannot afford to get out and expose a new batsman in these difficult conditions where the ball is turning a lot and where men will be around the bat putting pressure on the new batsman. So it's vitally important for Australia. Once their batsmen get a start, you've got to convert that start into a big score. You can't afford to get out after getting in and getting set and giving away your wicket. You can't afford to do that in Sri Lanka or in the subcontinent. Otherwise, it's going to put pressure on the rest of the batting unit and the batting order, and it's going to put pressure on the new batsman who's going to come in and face the music. So it's very important for Australia to convert those starts into big scores and not let one person score all the centuries like Usman Khawaja did in Pakistan, where he scored 2 centuries in that series. And also for Australia, it's important to do the basics right with the bat in this series in Sri Lanka. If they can build partnerships, rotate the strike, and as I mentioned before, convert the starts into big scores, then I think Australia will be best placed to score some runs in this series against Sri Lanka. It's not going to be easy. They know that, Australia. It's not going to be easy in these turning conditions in Sri Lanka. But if they can stick to their plans against the spinners as they did in Pakistan, and they have belief and self-belief and confidence in their own technique and their abilities to play the spinning and turning ball, then I think they'll do okay. But that's the biggest challenge facing Australia in this series, is how will they go about scoring runs and how will they go about playing the Sri Lankan spinners in this series. If Australia can put the Sri Lankan spinners under pressure by being aggressive, trying to hit them out of the attack, and then Sri Lanka will have to go back to their quicks, which they don't want to do in these conditions. They want to bowl their spinners for the majority of the overs. If they can do that and allow Sri Lanka to change their mindset and their tactics and have to go back to their quicks because their spinners are going for runs and leaking runs, then Australia will be in a good position to be in a dominant position in this test series. So it's going to be interesting to see how Australia go about playing the spinners in Sri Lanka. It's going to be a new challenge, different challenge as it was in Pakistan. But I'm very interested to see how Australia go about things playing the spinners in Sri Lanka. So those are some of the challenges that are going to be facing the Australian batsmen. Let's talk about the bowling and some of the challenges facing the bowlers for Australia in this test series against Sri Lanka. I don't think there's too many challenges for Australia with the ball in this series. I think Australia can take 20 wickets. They've got the quality bowling attack to do that with Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood and Lyon. Also Cameron Green, we've got to mention him as well. He's pretty handy with the ball as well. So Australia can definitely take 20 wickets in these conditions. But I've highlighted 2 bowlers, which will be very important for Australia in this series. One of them is Nathan Lyon. He'll be the key for Australia in this test series. You expect your frontline spinner in the subcontinent to take most of the 20 wickets and to get the job done for your team. For Nathan Lyon, he will definitely do that in this series because this is where it all started for Nathan Lyon. He made his debut in Galle, where the 2 test matches will be played in this series, back in 2011, where he made his test debut and got a wicket first ball, getting Kumar Sangakkara out, and then taking 5 wickets on debut. So fond memories for Nathan Lyon at Galle, and he will know that he will be the important bowler for Australia in this series. He's got to be the one that's got to take us the wickets, take the wickets for Australia, bowl a lot of overs, and get the job done for Australia, because you expect your frontline spinner in the subcontinent to do that, take majority of the wickets and get the job done. He had an okay series in Pakistan, Nathan Lyon. He only took 12 wickets with one 5-wicket haul, and that was a best of 5 for 83. Obviously, the pitches in Pakistan were flat, and it doesn't turn as much as in Pakistan as it does in Sri Lanka. So he'll get more off the surface in terms of spin and turn in Sri Lanka. In the 2016 Test Series, where Australia played Sri Lanka last in a Test Series in Sri Lanka, he took 16 wickets. So he'll definitely be vital for Australia in this Test Series in 2022. So Nathan Lyon's going to play a big role in this series for Australia. Absolutely, he is. I've highlighted Mitchell Starc. I think he's going to be another key bowler for Australia in this series. And Australia are going to rely on him a lot, as well as with Nathan Lyon. His left arm swing and pace will be vital for Australia. Also, his ability to reverse swing the ball at pace will be key for Australia. As we saw in the third test against Pakistan, when he bowled with Pat Cummins in tandem, in that display of reverse swing bowling, he's definitely going to be a vital key for Australia, especially in Gaul. And that comes on to my next point. He has a good record at Gaul, Mitchell Starc. In the 2016 Test Series at Gaul, he took 11 wickets for the match, 11 for 94. His best match figures ever in Test cricket. So he's going to be vital for Australia, especially here in Gaul, with the reverse swing, the pace, the left arm variation. He's going to be very vital for Australia. That's why Australia didn't want to risk him in the ODI series after he sustained that injury after the first T20 International where he cut his finger. Obviously, Australia lost the ODI series. There was no point bringing him back. Don't want to compromise the Test series, and that's what they've done here. So he's another bowler, along with Nathan Lyon, who will be key for Australia in terms of them trying to win their first Test series in Sri Lanka since 2011. And also Pat Cummins and Josh Hazlewood would be key as well. Obviously, Pat Cummins being the captain, be very important for him to lead from the front. He did that well in Pakistan. And Josh Hazlewood, who I think may not get a go in this series, because if Australia do decide to go with two spinners in Lyon or Swepson or Ashton Agar, I hear that John Holland may be recalled back to the side. That's going to be a bit of a shock if he is. But if Australia do go with two spinners, then probably Josh Hazlewood would miss out. But if Mitchell Starc has still got that injury and hasn't quite healed up, that cut on his finger, and if Josh Hazlewood gets a go, obviously we know what Josh Hazlewood can do. He's a very reliable bowler, good line and length bowler, sort of like Glenn McGrath. He can apply pressure and take wickets, and especially take wickets when the ball's reversing as well. So Cummins and Hazlewood will be key as always. Mitchell Starc, Nathan Lyon, all of those bowlers will be key for Australia. They do have a quality attack, and they will test the Sri Lankan batsmen in this Test series with the ball. Also for Australia, it's very important for them to do the basics well in this series with the ball. Bowl consistent line and length, execute your plans for the ball, bowl to your field, bowl dot balls and maidens to build pressure on the Sri Lankan batsmen, and take your chances. It's very important for Australia to take their chances now. As we saw in the series against Pakistan, they dropped quite a few catches in the slips, especially Steve Smith. He didn't have a great time of it in the slips in Pakistan. So it's very important for Australia, it's very important for the fielders to take their chances, to create the half chances, get the run-outs, get the half chances in terms of catches, create chances, make chances happen. It's very important to take all your catches, especially in the subcontinent. It's very important, especially around the bat. Short leg, bat pad, especially off Nathan Lyon, where you get those inside edges onto pad and it balloons up. Very important to take those catches. So important for Australia to take the catches and take their chances in this series. So those are some of the challenges that the Australian bowlers may face in this Test series against Sri Lanka, and obviously some of the challenges they'll face with the bat as well. But I think Australia will be very confident, and I think Australia will be very confident in terms of turning things around in Sri Lanka. Obviously, 2016 wasn't a great series. Australia lost 3-0. But they'll be very confident this time around with a different team, different mindset. I think they can get the job done in Sri Lanka. But those are some of the challenges that Australia may face with the bat and ball in this Test series against Sri Lanka. Let's predict who's going to win the Test series and the leading run scorer and leading wicket taker for the series. For the series winner, I've gone with Australia. I think Australia will win the series 1-0 against Sri Lanka. I think with the quality team that Australia has in terms of batsmen and bowlers, I think there'll be too much of a challenge for Sri Lanka, and I think Australia will win the series 1-0. And if Australia can do it, it will be a great series win. So Australia to win the series 1-0. I think the other test match may get affected by rain, maybe a draw, you never know. So I've gone with Australia to win the series 1-0. Leading run scorer for the series, I've gone with Usman Khawaja. I think that's a no-brainer. I think Usman Khawaja will have a great series again, like he did in Pakistan, and he will be one of the key batsmen for Australia in this test series. Leading wicket taker for the series, I've gone with Nathan Lyon. He'll be the key bowler for Australia in these spinning conditions in Sri Lanka. They're important for your frontline spinner to take majority of the wickets in the subcontinent. So I think Nathan Lyon will have a great series with the ball and take loads of wickets and hopefully guide Australia to victory. Those are my predictions for this test series. If you're listening to this episode of the podcast on YouTube, let us know in the comments who do you think will win the series and your predictions for the leading run scorer and leading wicket taker for this series. It will be great to hear your predictions and thoughts. This test series is important because every test counts and both teams would like to earn points for the World Test Championship. Can Sri Lanka repeat their historic series win in 2016 and win the Test series in 2022? Or can Australia overcome their spinning demons and win their first Test series in Sri Lanka since 2011? Let's hope for a competitive Test series, and may the best team win. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.